you have this like whole system that's become kind of dysfunctional because of its lack of competitive discourse. You need some way of resuscitating that in a way that's not just like Alex Jones fans arguing at each other in a subreddit. And you need basically high quality adversarial discourse, which is kind of the original foundation of science. You need that to happen in a structured and an effective way that can sort of be broadened. And instead, you just have people complaining, basically. And partly this is due to an excess of sort of libertarian and even democratic ideology, as people think that the alternative to the science is basically, whatever you heard on Joe Rogan last week or something. And no, actually, if you want there to be science as opposed to the science, that doesn't just happen. Right? That's not just a thing of like, oh yeah, I really have this like expert with this cool website I like, and I buy his supplements and they totally, make my dick hard. And that's sort of the quality of what's really sad here is that you're putting, essentially, you have this situation which is very common in conflicts where to a certain extent, each side is right about the other. And so, you have this situation where you look at, basically what, the professors and the big shots at Harvard have managed to come up with, and you're just like, wow, you guys really just screwed the fucking pooch. And they did, and yet you have nothing really worthy of mention to set against that. You have only random individuals who may randomly occasionally be right, but you don't have any power that you're creating to set against it. And so, that lack of understanding that essentially only institutions and organizations can have power, that there's no like, oh, we're going to give science back to the people, and is there's no such thing as populist science. It's ridiculous. It's a contradiction in terms. And so when you basically, this is a symptom of the larger problem, that when you essentially when you say to, Aristotle, identified three basically systems of government: monarchy, rule of the one; oligarchy, rule of the few; democracy, rule of the many. When we translate those into modern political English, instead of monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, we say dictatorship, democracy, populism. Right? So essentially, when your only opponent for oligarchy, or as we call it, democracy, is democracy, or as we call it, populism, you're essentially saying, okay, here I have this other way of governing which is better than your way of governing. And, if that's not true, you're really kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because you're essentially saying the alternative to oligarchy, the alternative to the rule of these experts who happen to have become really just literally fatally corrupted by the structure of their own oligarchy and the perverse incentives that it creates. The alternative to this is populism, and the alternative to this is basically, whatever gets the most shares on Facebook is going to prevail. Okay, that's populism. You want real populism? Hold a Facebook election, right? And Facebook can. I think Facebook at this point is probably better at identifying unique individuals than the state of Georgia. And I don't know about Florida, but if I were trying to trust who can identify the bots better, I might go with Facebook, right? But in any case, if you're only if your only replacement for Dr. Fauci and Peter Daszak and Shang Li and Batwoman, and if your only replacement for this system is let's have a Facebook election to see if vaccines will make our noses fall off, you're really you're batting zero. You're going to continue to bat zero. You basically, you're only pretending to have a solution. And in fact, what you're doing is you're essentially reinforcing the propaganda that says wow, the rule of these experts is sort of the only way. So when you basically take those two approaches, one is let's fix this system in some way or another, and the other is let's replace it with, I really can't imagine a society much less suited to democracy than the one we live in. That is much less suited to populism. Populism is most effective when you have a homogenous population, when you have a virtuous population, when you have a well-educated population, when you have finally an aggressive population, a population that's basically not, whatever the a passionate population, whatever the opposite of apathetic is. And if you look at all those bars, we're sitting down there, near zero next to like the Romans of like 300 AD, right? And so if populism in the leadership of the many over the few and the one is really going to be your thing, you're basically taking something that doesn't work and you're saying, well, the only, which is, the rule of Fauci, Daszak, and Batwoman, and you're saying, well, my only alternative to this thing is something that seems much more improbable, that has basically never historically worked, that, even the founders were, extremely suspicious of. And so you're essentially leading your fellow prisoners back into the trap because you're leading them down what seems to be an escape route, but is in fact a box canyon. And, that's why I'm a monarchist, essentially. And so what this event does is it says, okay, you really need to think clearly about what it would take to turn virology back from a liability to the human race to an asset, because right now its balance sheet is pretty red. And until you can think sort of clearly about that and clearly about how should this have been done and under what kind of system, what sort of power would it take? And, this is a completely open-ended question. It doesn't have to be a monarchy of any kind. You can, in theory, I suppose, I've never heard of it, replace an oligarchy with another oligarchy. And so you're like, okay, how do I build... And, of course, even in a monarchy, no one's a government of one, right? So how do I build an institution that would have the credibility to basically stand up here, irrespective of the authority, which might have to be gotten by other means? But you don't have to you might not even need the authority to just build the credibility. But essentially what I see is that I see a lot of people talking about this stuff, and I see no one talking about how do you build the alternative credibility that's something that can say, no, this is not right.